Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Joe Barella. I'm the Executive Director of the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment. Thank you for taking the time to learn from us today and also for us to listen to you. I hope all of you are here and want to thank all of you to learn more about what you can do to help prevent fraud, UI fraud here in Colorado, and to inform you what we're doing here at the department to make sure that the unemployment insurance system is secure as possible, and we're doing everything possible to make sure that people who are deservingly eligible for benefits are getting those benefits as quickly as possible, and also everything to prevent the unprecedented amount of fraud that's happening not only in Colorado but throughout the country with the unemployment insurance system. I think for most of you, the world has changed in the last 12 months. If you would recall back to early parts of March of 2020, we probably were seeing about 2,000 claims a week in the unemployment insurance system here in Colorado. As of April, we can tell you that in the last 13 months, we probably have 2 million cases in the unemployment insurance system. A little less than 1 million of those are actually real valid unemployment insurance claims. About 1.2 million are fraudulently or suspected fraudulent claims that we are having to deal with. And so just as our workload has increased with this fraudulent activity, we know the work that you're required to do has also increased. So appreciate you taking the time to learn from us today, but also share with us some of your concerns as we deal with this unfortunate event in the unemployment insurance system here in Colorado. Today, I do have a team put together to hopefully address and inform you on some of the issues, but also to address the questions. I do want to thank you for taking the time to submit on the form earlier this week the questions that you have about fraud in the unemployment insurance system. This time, I'm going to turn it over to Deputy Executive Director and the Chief Communications Officer for the Department of Labor and Employment, Cher Havand. Cher?
Thank you, Joe. Good afternoon, everyone. We will wait to have our slides brought up on the screen. Again, thank you for joining us. And as Director Barella said, not just in Colorado, but nationally, unfortunately, an outcome of unprecedented and historic demand for benefits has been fraud. And there have been reports late last year that a single scheme had detected about 36 billion in unemployment fraud. So again, certainly that's nationally, and unfortunately no state, including Colorado, has been immune from having this criminal activity hit our state in a number of ways. So before we get going, I just wanted to, as Director Barella noted, talk about how we got to where we are, and then we'll move into what we need from you and how you can help us combat this issue. Again, what we're seeing and what we have seen since the onset of COVID-19 has been a new type of fraud. So previously, UI fraud was really confined to somebody potentially who was working while collecting benefits, or somebody who was collecting benefits on, let's say, a spouse's behalf. Right now, what we are seeing is so much deeper and more pervasive than those more basic instances of fraud. And it's due to a couple of things. Early on, when the CARES Act was passed last year, we expanded unemployment to include gig workers, independent contractors, and self-employed. And why the program became susceptible to fraud at that time is because those workers don't have the W-2 wage verification checks and balances that regular UI has. And so you might be asking, well, I am an employer, I do pay premiums, so now why have they targeted me? Quite frankly, when we started to see the expiration of the first round of federal extended benefits, the criminals then began targeting their efforts on regular unemployment. And so what they were doing is purchasing stolen identities, sometimes for just a few dollars on the dark web, for example, identities that had been stolen due to maybe one or several past very large scale breaches. Think of the Equifax, Target, what have you. So a number of these very large scale breaches. And so those criminals were then using those stolen identities to file regular unemployment claims. We put in a number of triggers late last year with our vendor partner to help catch a lot of this fraudulent activity. To date, we have 58 fraud triggers in our UI system without disclosing what those are. They were really intended to stop a claim as soon as possible, and then push the claimant or the criminal into a forced identity verification mode, and would disallow any payment of benefits on that claim until that identity is proven. I will say, and I think we may address this later, that those triggers were only recently applied to regular unemployment insurance. So why you may have seen a spike in this activity again late last year, last quarter, is because those indicators had not yet been applied to our regular UI claims, which now they are. So again, the department is doing all that we can to stop these claims early on. We've added a number of measures once a claim is filed. But here's where we need you and your help, and we can get into later in the presentation explaining what we're going to be doing in the future to address this issue. So I will turn it over to Daniel Chase, our Chief of Staff.
Thanks, Cher. And just to dive in a little bit about what our approach to the fraud within the state of Colorado is. So first, let's talk about the numbers. In 2019, we had about 88 cases of fraud total in the state of Colorado UI system. Since March of 2020, we have now had 1.2 million claims that are likely fraudulently filed in the unemployment insurance system. Now, our strategy at the Department of Labor, as Cher said, started in about June of last year when we saw a massive uptick in the PUA claims in the PUA, Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, federal program. So at that time, we implemented our fraud detection system and our fraud detection matrix. That fraud detection system does not rely on preventing a fraudulent claim from being filed. And that's very important for you as employers to note. We cannot stop a fraudulent claim from being initially filed within our system. We have nothing to run it against. We have no identity markers to verify until that gets filed in our system. At that time, we run our 58 indicators against every single claim in our system every single night. And those 58 indicators, if even a single one gets triggered, a payment hold gets set on that claim until they verify their identity with us or until further investigation takes place, depending on how serious the indicator is that they triggered. We, at this point, have started, as of last month, we now mandate that every newly filed claim in our system must verify their identity through our ID.me process. And so that's a vendor that we brought on to help us verify identities using biometrics, data that they can find, and things like that. And so when a claim gets filed, no payment will now go out until they verify their identity. That's a relatively new technology. There was really no need for it in the past because we could rely on the sanctity of a social security number and the privacy of a social security number. But today, because of the mass data breaches, we can't rely on that anymore. And so that's a shift for us. Why are employers getting notified? Why do I, as an employer, get notified of these fraudulent claims? The reason is because the system, our system, will automatically connect any wages that are reported on a social security number with an employer. So when a social security number gets entered in our system to file a claim, it then looks for all the wages reported on that social security number, and it triggers fact-finding documents to go out to those employers, all automatically. The claimant or the criminal does not necessarily need to enter that information in order for that to happen. So that will go out to you automatically. And because of that process, employers have become a significant portion of our fraud detection efforts. You are the ones notified of fraudulent claims being filed, and you know whether or not they're fraudulent when you get that fact-finding document. So with that is when we started launching our report forms online and fraud efforts through that method. At this point, what we're asking for from employers is kind of a twofold piece. Number one, we need your help in notifying victims that they are victims of identity theft. The fraudulent unemployment claim is just a sign that their identity has been stolen at some point in the last few years. Their identity has been stolen and used to file this unemployment insurance claim. That can be very harmful to a victim. And the other thing we need employers to help us with is to make sure we are notified that this is a fraudulent claim. Our fraud detection matrix can catch 99.9% of fraudulent claims being filed when they get filed in our system. However, there's that 0.1% that we need to catch, and that's where we need the employers to come in and help report those claims to us so that we can set payment holds on those automatically. Now, what we ask for victims of identity theft is, number one, they should report to the 3 credit bureaus and invest in credit monitoring. I also wanted to make sure people saw that on our website, coloradoui.gov, and under fraud prevention, we've partnered with the Attorney General's office, and Steve Kaufman is here to help us with this, and he's a member of that unit from the Consumer Protection Division. We partnered with them to get the information out to victims of what they should do because they're a victim of identity theft. Unemployment insurance will not harm someone's credit on its own. If an unemployment insurance claim is filed, that does not ping the credit bureaus, that does not do any of that. However, what that means is that the criminal has these identities to then use them for other methods. So to, get a large line of credit, those kind of things that would be very harmful to someone's credit. The other thing we ask is that if there is a victim of identity theft and they receive a U.S. bank card from us, they're going to want to report that claim as fraudulent both to us through our website, coloradoui.gov, and fraud prevention again, and U.S. Bank if they receive that Relia card. And the most important thing for us in all of this process is to make sure there is a fraud report made through our website. And so there's 2 different forms, one for a victim and now one for employers. And that employer form is relatively new. Only in about the last month have we had an employer specific and employer focused form. A report into those forms, what that allows us to do then is our system will automatically connect that fraud report with the claim that was filed in our system, and it will automatically set a payment hold on that claim to make sure no further funds go out until the identity is verified of that claimant. So that is a very important step for us. Phil, do you want to talk about what employers should do and what employers should not do?
Sure. Thank you, Daniel. And good afternoon, everybody. Philip Spessart, I'm the Unemployment Insurance Division Director. And so a couple of things important here for you as employers, because we know that we saw a large uptick in our state system the end of December before we moved over into MyUI Plus. We had several reported fraudulent claims at that point in time, and we're manually trying to stop those unemployment insurance claims, which wasn't efficient. This is part of the reason we ultimately moved when we did to move into our brand new system, MyUI Plus, on January 10th, because as previously discussed by Cher, that allowed us to immediately and overnight to start applying those fraud holds that we have developed as we continue on in this process. Part of what we're going to ask you to do here also assists us with continuing to develop those fraud holds. Those fraud holds continue to grow in number every day. The fraudsters who engage in this activity are part of large criminal organizations. They are persistent, and they continue to work on these processes to file fraudulent claims. They continue to try to figure out what our holds may be so that they can continue to file claims, understanding that what they are trying to do is collect some really quick money and then be gone before the claim can be shut down. So if you receive information that you believe is for a fraudulent claim, what I'm going to ask you to do first is there's 2 types you may receive. One may be the name of an individual who has never, ever worked for you. One may be an individual who is still working for you today. In the case where it's an individual who is still working for you today, the very first thing you need to do is speak to that employee and ask them if they have filed the unemployment insurance claim. Reason for this is that individual may have no clue that they are the victim of identity theft, and this is going to be the first opportunity they receive and know that their identity has been compromised, either through some of those breaches early on with Equifax, with Target, with Facebook. These are where those breaches are coming from. These breaches are not coming from within our system. We don't even carry the information on there sufficient to file an unemployment insurance claim for that to have come out of our information. So first thing you need to do is speak to the victim of identity theft. If they tell you, no, they did not file that unemployment insurance claim and they're a victim of such theft, we need you to direct them to our unemployment insurance website, coloradoui.gov, to look for resources. And there's a form online where they can also report that fraudulent claim. Either case, if it's somebody who's still working for you or an individual who has never, ever worked for you as an employer, we also want you to immediately go online to report that suspected fraud using an online form that has been created strictly for employers at this point in time. Again, you access that at coloradoui.gov and you use that reporting as an employer. Now, note, as Daniel had mentioned earlier, Our system currently is designed to allow those claims to be filed, and then we look to stop payment on those unemployment insurance claims or prevent any payments from going out on those unemployment insurance claims. There are various automated processes that occur in the filing of an unemployment insurance claim. So even after you submit the fraud report to us, it is very likely, very possible you will still receive correspondence related to that unemployment insurance claim. If you have reported it as fraudulent, you can disregard that additional correspondence from the division on those claims. We are working to find ways to continue to suppress that type of information. In our perfect world, if once we knew a claim was fraudulent, we would not be bugging you with additional paperwork to file on an unemployment insurance claim. As employers, you're all busy and you have limited time to complete that paperwork for claims that are completely meaningless. If at this point in time you happen to be an employer who utilizes sides to report job separations, unfortunately for you, you are going to need to use the online form to report the fraud to us. This is the most efficient way to do it. And then after that, you still, as a preferred partner with sides, unfortunately, are required to fill out the documentation related to the separations. Understanding that can be very difficult for an individual who's still working for you. Report and utilize the still working for you item on there. Dates of employment become difficult, so you may ultimately end up putting the date that you're actually filling out the form if you need to do that on sites. We are working on a robotic process for employers who are marking certain separations on there under the other category and trying to tell us it's a fraudulent claim in that manner, to be able to pick up those words fraud so that we can ultimately stop those claims from paying at that point in time and get you to a point where you don't have to fill out two different forms on there. There are also certain things that you as an employer should try to avoid doing. So primarily, again, this is going to exclude our sides employers, but for all other employers, do not complete the questionnaire from My UI Employer or the paper form that we send to you in the mail. Submitting that report, submitting the fraud report online allows us to hold payment on a claim pending an investigation. Completing those questionnaires at this point in time does not allow us to hold up payment on a claim. For those of you that do not recall, early on in the pandemic and continuing, there has been, based on sheer volume of work and ability to process claims and make payments timely, there's an executive order out there that ultimately allows us to make payment on those claims while processing those claims. So if you are only reporting the fraud through that questionnaire, that is not going to hold up payment on the claim pending the investigation. Payments will go out. If you are also an employer, do not file an appeal. Payment of any fraudulent benefits will not be charged to your account upon a determination or confirmation of fraud, and it will not impact your experience rating for contributory employers when your premium rates are calculated. Also, do not call the main UI call center at 303-318-9000. Again, understanding that that is often the phone number that is on the top of that paperwork. We prefer, and it's easier for you, if you need to report it by phone, to contact Employer Services at 303-318-9100 if you have questions after completing the form. Rest assured, the report is received, the claim is under investigation. When you initially file that, you should receive a pop-up, an indication that the fraud report has been received. It will provide you similar information to this. We are working on being able to provide employers additional confirmation subsequent to the report being received, to again inform you that the report has been received, and again to remind you about some of these steps, about some of the paperwork that will still come, and that you can ignore some of that paperwork. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Daniel.
Thank you, Phil. And we kind of wanted to do an abbreviated version of our kind of normal presentation that we've given to some employers through Chambers of Commerce and other things, and to really focus in on the employer questions that were submitted for this webinar. We know there are a lot of questions out there and a lot of confusion, frustration, and so we wanted to hit hard on the questions. And so I grouped as many as I could together, and we're going to try to hit as many as we can today, and provide as much information as we can, and then follow up with you guys afterwards as well. So our first question is a very common one that we get. Where did the data being used to file these fraudulent claims come from? Did it come from CDLE, from a breach within CDLE's database? Did it come from a breach on an employer's database? The answer to that is that there's no indication right now that this is either a CDLE or an employer-specific data breach. At this point, the sheer volume of claims we're looking at, keep in mind, we're looking at about 1.2 million cases of identity theft and 1.2 million claims being filed in our system. So at that rate, every employer is going to get at a high percentage of their workforce. Even CDLE as an agency, our staff are getting hit with unemployment claims as well. And with regard to the CDLE piece, we don't keep a lot of the data that's being used on these fraudulent claims. The criminals are using things like the date of birth of the victim, the phone number of the victim, the mailing address of the victim, these kind of things that we don't keep. We only keep the social security number and the wages for these folks. And so that there's no way this data would have come from us. At this point, our main theory is that the data is coming from the massive numbers of identities that have been compromised in the last 10 years through these mass data breaches. I put a list of the top 5 that I know of here and how many identities were compromised through these different data breaches. So that's where we suspect this is coming from. Steve, anything you want to add from the Attorney General's side on identity theft and where it's coming from?
No, I think you've covered it, Daniel. I think the issue is that this information is out there from any number of different sources. As best we understand, the criminals are actually acquiring it on the dark web, and there are a lot of sources for information that are on the dark web. Some of these data breaches will provide different bits of information. Some of it may be combined. The thing that worries me, quite frankly, is that it may be coming from a data breach that's happened that we don't yet know about, because that data will appear on the dark web, but someone who has been hacked may not have detected that and reported it yet.
And we will include, we're going to send out quite a few follow-up documents to our employer listserv. So if you got it through us or maybe through another party, we'll send out a follow-up that includes a number of things, including the slide deck. And then also I'm going to include in there a USA Today story that went in depth as to the how that the criminals did this. And they actually interview one of the criminals that's taking part in this. So that has a lot of good information around the dark web and how information is accessed through there.
And Daniel, I think I'm going to tag on a little bit to what Steve mentioned there. So we have received recent reports that on the dark web, there are parties on there mentioning for sale and providing for sale PII, personal identifying information, and that they are guaranteeing it has not already been utilized to file an unemployment insurance claim. To go a little further, because again, as we've indicated, these fraudsters are persistent, and in many states, if claims have been filed using the same social security number in many states, that's obviously highly suspicious, will be caught. And so now the big market is for PII that has not already been utilized to file unemployment insurance claims.
Thanks, Phil. And moving on to our next question, I know this is going to be very important for our employer community. So in terms of charging for payments made on fraudulent claims, so we have 2 types of employers. We've got reimbursable employers, so employers that reimburse us dollar for dollar on any unemployment benefits paid out on their behalf. And then we've got contributory employers. These are ones that are charged premiums every quarter based on the wages they pay to employees. So Phil, do you want to address both of those categories?
Sure, and it's actually a good question, right? Reimbursable employers are paying dollar for benefits paid after the fact through a billing statement. Contributory employers, you pay in a premium every quarter, and that premium is normally impacted by your experience rating, which is driven by charges that occurred against your unemployment insurance account. So employers are not going to be made responsible for fraudulent payments being made. Once they're made, once those are confirmed as fraudulent, that allows us to recredit accounts. It allows us to recredit anything related to billing for reimbursable employers. If you as an employer, whether you are a contributory employer or reimbursable employer, see charges on your billing statement, you can contact employer services to have that removed. If the employer pays for the fraudulent claim, either via the charges ultimately on their account that impacts their premium rate, or again is paying as a reimbursable employer, The employer can be credited once the system catches up and that is confirmed fraud, and we've established the overpayment on that claim, which will then allow it to recredit your account. This again is the other reason we ask you to report these as quickly as possible through that online form. We would prefer that we prevented payment up front, as I'm sure you would, in order to prevent having to deal with potential credits or not. If you believe it's fraudulent and you elect not to pay at that point in time, you as an employer are running a potential risk. It's a calculated risk. If you have elected not to pay for that and it's later determined that that claim is not fraudulent, you will be required to pay that amount plus penalties and interest.
Thank you, Phil. And so, yeah, the gist is for these claims, it's harder to understand whether or not they're fraudulent from an employer's perspective. So keep in mind that even if you as an employer receive a claim from an employee that maybe separated from you a year ago, right? 12 months before this claim was filed, and you receive this documentation, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a fraudulent claim filed against your business. Claimants can't choose which employers they file against. We look at a base period of about 18 months from the date they file their claim, and we will send fact-finding documents out to all employers within that base period. So in terms of what you guys are charged for, it's going to be anything that is fraudulent, we will not be holding on again. So the third question I had is, I received the paperwork on a fraudulent claim, filled it out, and then how will I know the case is closed? Phil, you want to address this one?
Yeah, so again, if you filled out the online form, we will close it down immediately. Again, remember, some of those processes are automated, so you may still receive documents related to it. Depending on when this occurred, we have worked on suppressing some other automated processes that were occurring on these unemployment insurance claims. For instance, we became aware of employers who weren't filling out the questionnaire, just as we asked them not to do. And then ultimately they were receiving decisions telling them that they had lost the right to protest the unemployment insurance claim. That was an automated process wherein the form wasn't received on time and it automatically denied that loss of right to protest. We have suppressed that from occurring at this point in time, so those do not go out. Furthermore, on any that we had previously indicated that you had lost the right to protest, we are actually going back on those and we are nullifying those issues or removing them. So again, if we recall back to where we talked about do not appeal a decision, we are erasing those so that there is no need to appeal on behalf of an employer. Again, we will continue to work forward on telling you and providing additional letters that say, again, it has been received, the claim has been shut down at this point in time. That letter will still tell you, you may still receive some additional documents in the mail, but it will also, again, validate the need not to continue to provide responses on those questionnaires. Again, I will reiterate again, most important thing to do when you receive that fraudulent claim after confirming it with the claimant is to go online and complete that form immediately. Those allow us to stop payment on those claims before a fraudulent individual can even try to do their first weekly certification and receive payment.
Thanks, Phil. The fourth question, another one we get a lot. What is the investigation process for claims that are filed during the pandemic? We are paying on claims that appear to not have been investigated. So this is a tough question. The problem is that we are balancing both unprecedented fraud in our system, which is what we're talking about today, but also an unprecedented demand on our system from legitimate claimants who are out of work through no fault of their own due to the pandemic, and they need benefits quickly because a lot of these people have been out of work for a long time. So we cannot delay benefits to these folks. So we're walking that tightrope of we need to catch these claims, but we also need to pay people benefits that are deserving. And so just to give you guys some background, Phil mentioned it earlier, we do have a executive order in place that allows us to pay claims while we are processing them. Keep in mind that in order to do that, the claim has to have a background of wages that have been paid to it. We don't just pay if you file a claim and there's no background of wage history. It doesn't get you that money. So that wouldn't work. But the investigation process does happen after we begin paying the claims. With regard to fraudulent claims, the main piece that we are pushing is identity verification. And that is stopping the fraudsters in their path because they can't get past the identity verification because that's not who they are. And so the other piece of that too is our fraud detection matrix, which compares claims across each other. It also looks at individual pieces of a claim. So maybe it looks at the social security number, it comes up as deceased. That would be something that our system detects upon filing and would stop payment on that claim. So our system is looking at a number of factors, but in terms of the traditional investigation process, that is happening after payment. And Phil, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I would just say, and I understand part of this can be, frustrating for employers out there. Why is this still paying? I've reported it as a quit or a discharge, or I believe that this is fraudulent. It's difficult on one hand to try to explain the volume being faced for all of you out there to kind of understand what the department, the division is under, why that executive order exists in the first place. So to try to give you an idea, Director Barella mentioned it early on in the course of this webinar that we have just under 1 million valid claims that have been filed. And we have about 1.2 million claims that we suspect as being fraudulent. Keep in mind that during the state fiscal year of 2019 and the 3 years prior, we averaged processing or having about 109,000 claims per year. So the volume has gone up exponentially related to the pandemic. Obviously, it's also gone up exponentially related to the fraud opportunities that were created initially within the pandemic unemployment assistance program that was created for gig workers. This is a tremendous amount of work. Looking at data early on and what we suspected might be coming by comparing it to what we knew best with some of the shutdowns related to how the pandemic would affect us. The best data you could look at was basically hurricanes and how Hurricane Katrina, in fact, had actually impacted certain states. And then obviously it was clear from the get-go that the first several weeks within that pandemic, just within our state system, would overwhelm us on the capability and capacity to be able to process those claims timely to provide unemployment insurance payments. In fact, the math basically said it would take 8 to 12 months to process most of those unemployment insurance claims. If you're not paying on those unemployment insurance claims while processing them, the economic conditions in this state become all that more grim and multiply. And so many of you who are employers today, who are still holding on as employers today, had those payments not been going out while processing, unfortunately, many of you may not have been employers as of today. So just to try to clarify why the executive order exists, why some of that processing is occurring as it is, economic decisions to try to keep some of you businesses alive, and also to allow claimants to continue to be able to avoid evictions and pay their bills.
Thanks, Phil. The next question we get is another common question we get from employers, which is I've recently been asked to fill out a couple of questionnaires for people who have filed unemployment but never worked at our company. Phil mentioned those are kind of the two major scenarios we see as we see this person is still working for my company or this person never worked for my company. And a lot of times what we're seeing is the ones that have never worked for the company, these are hitting the small employers, the small businesses, and they're hitting them in huge volumes. And so that's to overwhelm both us and employers and hopefully not return that fact finding and not report the claim as fraudulent. And so would you please add a field in your questionnaire toward the top where an employer can state this person has never worked for our company, and then set the form so that the employer is not required to fill out all those other irrelevant fields. Phil, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, it's a great question, and this is an area that we're working on to actually update all of those questionnaires, all the forms more generally. So, for instance, we also talked about earlier on, if your side's employer, I need you to go 2 different places. We need you to go 2 different places right now to report the fraud. We're looking at being able to prevent a check mark box or a box where you can mark you believe the claim is fraudulent, and then that wouldn't require you to go fill out the second online form. Same thing with this employee has never worked for me. And so that then we could utilize that to ensure that we prevented payments on those unemployment insurance claims. I will tell you, unfortunately, I can only tell you anecdotally on many of those ones where you are saying that this individual did not work for me. Generally, there weren't any wages reported under your account on those claims. So it generally is not resulting in any charges against your account. there are a fair number of claims that we believe are being filed on the state system, hoping that they will show insufficient wages available and then be able to try to file the pandemic unemployment assistance program claim. This is also where you come in right now by filling out that online form and telling us it's fraudulent. That allows us to lock down that claim, prevent not just payment on that claim, but prevent that fraudster from going over and now filing the pandemic unemployment assistance claim. But yes, we are continuing to work in this area. We will continue to work in all these areas to improve through the pandemic and beyond.
Thanks, Phil. The next question is, it's a tough one because it's multifaceted. So with all the fraud claims, how do I make sure this does not affect my unemployment insurance payroll tax? And so to give some background around this, what this is referring to is the claims that are paid out and they are state UI claims. The state unemployment insurance claims are paid for using the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund, which is 100% employer funded. And that's what impacts your tax rate. The piece of this is, though, that most, I would say nearly all of the fraudulent payments that we have found at this point are within the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance System and the Federal Pandemic Unemployment Compensation. Both of those are federally funded and does not impact the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund. But the piece of this that I wanted to make sure to illustrate to employers is that the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund started out at the beginning of the pandemic with $1.2 billion in it. We are now, as of today, we just surpassed $1 billion in borrowing to get us up to zero. So that means we are essentially in debt to the federal government by $1 billion. And so when you ask, is this going to impact my payroll rate? The answer is no, fraud will not impact your payroll rate. However, the sheer deficit that the trust fund is in, all employer rates are expected to go up significantly. So this year, we jumped about 3 rate schedules higher than you were in 2020. In 2022, we are expecting to jump to the highest rate schedule, solely as a result of the deficit of the trust fund. And that will sit at that deficit. We expect it to get back up to zero in 2025. So while yes, fraud is not going to impact your payroll rate, the payroll rate itself will go up significantly regardless of fraud. Phil, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think I would just remind individuals that those calculations occur every year, and it's based on benefits that are paid out between July 1 of the prior year through June 30 of the continuing year. So we're in another period here where we're coming up on the end of that June 3rd period where those rates will be recalculated. And so as Daniel talked about last year, there was actually still some money sitting in the pool fund at that point in time in June, or in the trust fund in June when they were calculated. And so while it did move quite a ways over, next to last on the highest portion on that rate charge, it didn't move all the way. However, it would be fair to anticipate, based on what we know related to borrowing right now, that it is likely it will move to that highest rate possible. Unfortunately, again, that's not a result of fraudulent payments being made. It's a result of the actual total benefits that have been paid to individuals out in Colorado who've been unemployed as a result of the pandemic. We will get a little better feel for how well that may move, because this is the current quarter where the largest amount of funds come in on premiums from you as employers during any given year is after the conclusion of the first quarter of the year. And so that could alter it, although it's not likely that there will be sufficient in there to avoid moving it to the highest rate at this point in time, unfortunately.
And just to provide a little more background, at this point, those that are unemployed are likely have been on unemployment for long enough where they've moved off of state UI benefits and have moved on to some sort of federal program that is fully federally funded. So we've seen that payment amount decrease, but again, with the deficit we're seeing, it's not likely to go down too soon. So just wanted to make that clear with this question. Next question we got, is the CDLE able to vet unemployment claims before someone submits them and compare them to that company's quarterly UI reports to determine if this person was ever employed by the company? And so the answer to that is no. We are not able to compare them against the quarterly UI reports at the time of filing, because the quarterly UI reports are in a lag. So you report those to us, well after they've earned those wages. We do run the wage cross match regularly in our system to try to catch those that are both working and collecting benefits. And so that is a process we run now. But the verification on the front end has to be identity verification. And that's about all we are able to run to determine whether or not these claims are real. Phil, anything else?
I would just again reiterate, for those who have never been employed with you, you may get the paperwork, right, asking about a reason for separation for that individual. But at least at that point in time, there would be no potential charge against your account because they have never worked for you. You've never reported any wages. You've never paid any premiums on them, right? Because they didn't work for you at that point in time. It does mean, however, even after you report that as fraudulent, you may receive yet one additional document than you do against a normal claim, which might be a request for you to provide some wage information. Again, these are ones I encourage you to still work on shutting down rapidly. Again, I'm going to reiterate that these fraudsters are very, very persistent. There is nothing that might try to stop one of those fraudsters from trying to create bogus and phony W-2s or check stubs from your business in the hopes that as an employer, you never reported as fraudulent, and that based on sheer volume, somehow we decide to add those wages to a claim, which then would impact you potentially on the tax rate. So again, reiterate, even if they have never worked for you, fill out that online form as quickly as you can.
Thanks, Phil. The next question is for our sides employers. We know you're out there. When completing job separation information on the sides e-response system, I am often asked to complete a form with additional information. There are no instructions on how to submit the completed additional information form. How should we submit it? And why can't this request to be information be part of the digital submission? Phil, for you.
This is a good one. So this is obviously our new fact-finding questionnaire, and the attachment for employers in the side systems is designed to gather more thorough information that is normally provided within the answers or responses that can be provided on sides. So it's an addendum to the national side system. And so there are two methods by which you can submit these. You can download the attachment, save it to your system for completion, then upload it again in the attachment option of sides. Or the employer can also print the attachment, complete it by hand, scan it back into their computer, save it, and then upload into sides in the attachment option. It's important to know we continue to work with sides in this area to try to continue to refine and better improve this process for you employers that utilize sides. But right now, these are the two steps you would have to take related to those additional questionnaires. And the reason you're getting those additional questionnaires is just to provide more thorough information so that when we are making that decision related to the job separation, it is based fully on the facts related to that separation from employment.
Thanks, Phil. The next question, what are you doing to prosecute people engaging in the fraud? What is the status of the prosecution? So I'll start this, then Steve, I'll turn it over to you for some flavor. But just so you guys know, last month we engaged in a partnership with the Colorado Attorney General's office, who launched a law enforcement task force specifically targeting those who are committing unemployment insurance fraud against the state of Colorado. So at this point, we're in the investigation stage. Those investigations are lengthy. We have not moved to any prosecutions at this time. Steve, anything you want to add to that one?
Yeah, there are just a couple things. So the task force involves our federal partners who have reach outside of the state of Colorado, as well as local DAs who are involved in the process. And so we've got a large number of law enforcement agencies looking at this and who are focused on it. We still need information. And so if employers have tips of people they believe are committing fraud or doing that, we want to hear about that. And so they can file those tips on our webpage at stopfraudcolorado.gov. We have a place where folks can file complaints or tips, and we welcome that information because it will help our investigation.
Thanks, Steve. Okay, question number 10. Should I report the fraudulent claims to my local police department? Steve, I think I'm going to turn this one over to you as well.
Yeah. So on our webpage, we had it up earlier, stopfraudcolorado.gov. There is an identity theft repair kit that we have put up for individuals so they can navigate through this process. We've updated that to deal just with this unemployment insurance problem. And in the past, when individuals had unemployment or had some type of fraud or identity theft, they were asked to report that to local law enforcement. Well, you can imagine that local police departments are overwhelmed by the 1.2 million claims that have come in, and they're not able to process that, and nor are they able to investigate that. We've got to do that on a statewide basis more systematically. So at this point in time, we're really not asking folks to report fraud to their local police departments. The best place to report the fraud is actually on CDLE's webpage and to report it there, because that's how we're able to track it and better deal with it. As Daniel mentioned at the top, the other thing that individuals should do who are facing this is report this to their credit bureaus and put a check or a freeze on their credit reports. There are different options that you have, and to do that, those are the two best steps. The other step that someone should really take is to monitor their own credit and their own accounts to make sure that there's no fraud there, and to be vigilant in dealing with this. For example, one of the things we're expecting that could happen is that this same identity theft that's going on could be used to file fraudulent tax returns to get refunds. And folks, if they're ready to file their tax returns, go ahead and do it now and do it before the fraudsters can, so you can get your refund check and not have to worry about it.
And Steve, that's a good point on the tax refund. I don't have a question on here specifically related to tax implications of unemployment insurance benefits, and specifically fraudulent unemployment insurance benefits sent out on behalf of a victim. We do have on our website, coloradoui.gov, under the fraud prevention tab, we do have specifically 1099-G related information. So these are tax documents that were sent out to all claimants to say, hey, you got this amount of money from the unemployment insurance division, here's the amount of taxes you owe. If that was sent out to a victim that is a victim of fraud and that those benefits were paid out as a result of identity theft and not to them, we encourage those victims to go online to our website and request a corrected, zeroed out 1099-G from us, because if we sent out a 1099-G to the victim, we also sent that to the IRS. And so they will want to get a corrected 1099-G from us. That is taking time for us to process. So the IRS guidance for victims of identity theft, and specifically for victims of unemployment insurance fraud, is to go ahead and file your taxes based on income received, not on income indicated on those 1099-Gs. So they would indicate zero, and then once we come around and correct that, they would then have the documentation to show if the IRS comes back around. So just wanted to hit on that while you mentioned that, Steve. Thank you very much. Okay, so our next question. So when unemployment insurance fraud is committed, the victim reports fraud to a credit reporting company. The credit reporting company sends alerts to creditors. That alert can trigger creditors to review the victim's credit and decide whether to reduce the amount of available credit. That decision results in less borrowing power, which leads to a reduction of the credit score. Is there a letter that can be accessed so that the victim has an explanation of unemployment fraud and why any creditor action was taken? So Cher, I'm going to let you take that one as to the letter we're looking at for victims of fraud.
Thanks, Daniel. We're working on two letters, actually. So one that would go to the victim of UI fraud, one that would go to the employer after the reporting of fraud. The first letter for the individual, in fact, could be used under a circumstance like this. And our plan is to actually print and mail those letters to the victims. The second letter to employers will virtually do the same thing, so that employers have a record of reporting it into the department. And so if, as Phil mentioned, there is a discrepancy in benefit charges on a charging statement, we'd like the employer who experienced the fraud to have a record they can refer to. We hope to have this new system in place next week. Again, the key ingredient, as we've been discussing this entire time, is immediate reporting into the department through either of those forms. Again, these letters will be part of that workflow.
And part of the reason we push people to report on the form is because we don't have any contact information for victims of identity theft. The contact information we have in our system is going to be entered by the criminal, and so it's not reliable for us to reach out to victims and say, "Hey, you're a victim of identity theft." So that's that portion. And Steve, do you want to touch on the other pieces of this question?
Yeah, sure. So the letter that CDLE is going to send out is really important for individuals to have, because not only does it allow them to deal with the credit reporting bureaus, but if they're subject to other effects of identity theft, for example, in dealing with a bank or dealing with a credit card company or someone else that is trying to use their identity for unlawful purposes, that letter will allow them to manage that situation more effectively. And that's the type of thing that local police departments used to generate, but they're not able to generate it at this point in time. So CDLE is stepping up and providing that information to help consumers who have been the subject to identity theft.
And a big piece of our kind of rework of our employer process with regard to fraudulent claims is our goal is to really is going to be to suppress documentation except for a letter that says, hey, a claim was filed under this individual's name, until that identity is actually verified in our system. And then that's when documentation, fact finding, and everything like that would go out, which would be instrumental for employers. And we know that, and that's what we're working toward. Okay, question number 12, which I think is my last scripted question. If we have time, I may throw an extra one in there from my list. But one of our current employees received a letter that they owe money back to the state due to the findings of a claim that they did not file. It was a fraudulent claim. What guidance can I give them on how to handle that communication? Will they be responsible to pay back money they did not get/use? Phil, this one's for you.
So this is an interesting question, and we'll take it out in about two different parts. So if this is a claim that was ultimately reported as fraudulent and was shut down as fraudulent, again, as we discussed earlier, oftentimes that creates the overpayment on the unemployment insurance claim. So prior to March 10th of this year, that again was an automated process where some of those demand and repayment letters are being generated and unfortunately going to victims of identity theft when that was never our intention in the first place. Again, that acts as if you're victimizing that person a second time. At that point in time, we have closed down and shut down that automated process. So if it were a claim that was reported as fraudulent that resulted in that overpayment, then that kind of documentation will not be coming out in the future. However, let's take this a step further and pretend this is a claimant or an individual who did not know there was an unemployment insurance claim filed in their name, or utilizing their address for that matter. And a portion of the claim has been processed under normal processing that created an overpayment. And now they're getting that demand and repayment letter because this is quote unquote at that point in time considered a valid overpayment. This would be where you would want to instruct that person, if that's the case, to go online and make that report that it is a fraudulent claim. Once these are confirmed as fraudulent claims, absolutely none of those victims are required to repay those benefits. It does create an overpayment in our system again, just to realize that's how we recredit your account. Related to that is creating the overpayment. It also allows us to keep figures on file for, as Steve talked about, as we pursue prosecutions down the road, to be able to establish how much was paid out on a fraudulent unemployment insurance claim. But if they are the victim of fraud, the answer is no, they are not required to repay those overpaid benefits.
Thanks, Phil. And we've got time for one last question, so I'll throw this one at you, Phil. People are working remotely. You are not giving enough response time for your request for information regarding claims. All of the requests I have received have been for fraudulent claims, but I've missed the deadline getting the form back to you. Phil?
Couple things here. The protest period actually changed during the course of the pandemic. So it is no longer 12 calendar days. By statute, it is 7 calendar days by which to respond to the unemployment insurance claims. I will note for that question, we had found a bit of an issue, especially related to claims where somebody came in, started the claim filing process, but then didn't complete it for another day or so, that was inappropriately putting the wrong return date on those claims, and it was causing issues. So in other words, you would be an employer who might have received that document, whether working remotely or not, and it might have indicated that you would have seen a mailing date that it was the 23rd of the month, and yet it was due on the 24th of the month. So we discovered a bit of a glitch there and have worked to fix that. So again, those dates are also related to the date the claim was actually completed being filed, not when it was actually started. That actually came about, thank you to a couple of employers who had questioned that up front and caused us to go look and discover that issue. Again, at this point in time, we are not holding employers responsible for those 7 days on responses. And so I still would want to, again, reiterate, if it's fraudulent first, before you fill out that questionnaire, if you're inclined to fill out the questionnaire, or if you're required to go through sites, go online and report that the minute you're aware of it to coloradoui.gov, because that is what allows us to shut down that claim the quickest. And to me, that if you receive notice and it's now 8 days after the claim's filed, again, that still gives us a great opportunity to prevent any payments on those claims.
Thanks, Phil. And just to make sure everyone knows where all of our resources are on our website, I just want to show, here's our homepage. You can go down here to report identity theft /fraud, the homepage, sorry, coloradoui.gov. And on this page, you'll see reporting identity theft as an individual or reporting an identity theft as an employer, as well as the 1099G button I had mentioned. You're going to see some other resources here, including the Attorney General's Identity Theft Repair Kit, and then some FAQs both for individuals, and here's FAQs as well for employers that we keep updated. This video as well will be accessible through this page, and it will be on our YouTube channel, should you want to go back and watch it. The other piece too, Cher, we are sending out a follow-up to this. Cher, do you want to mention that real quick?
Sure, Daniel, just a flag for those who registered and were able to get through the registration. We will follow up with a link to this. We'll also send it to all employers for whom we have email addresses. So that'd be anybody who has registered with My UI Employer. And we'll likely post it in addition to, as Daniel said, our YouTube channel on the CDLE website as well.
And with that, we are all done with our webinar for this one. We will be continuously looking for feedback as well. And if we need to do more webinars like this to continue to answer your questions, we are happy to do so, and we'll be responsive to that. So thank you, Steve, for joining, and Phil and Cher for helping moderate. And thank you all as employers for your partnership in this fight against fraud. This is a new fraud. We as the Department of Labor have never dealt with this kind of fraud before, so we're learning as we go and implementing the measures we see that we can. So thank you all.